They say some souls can't be tamed. They say some people are too broken to be loved. This story is for anyone who has ever been told they were too much. In the heart of the unforgiving West, a girl with an unbreakable will is sold for less than the price of a bottle of whiskey. Her fire is seen as a flaw to be extinguished. But what happens when a man who knows everything about being broken looks at that fire and doesn't see a flaw? He sees a mirror. He sees salvation. Before you see how their story ends, you must first ask yourself, what is stronger? The world that tries to break you, or the one person who gives you a reason to fight back? Stay, and you will find the answer. The saloon doors flew open with a weary sigh, pushing in a gust of prairie dust and exposing the raw scene within. The air was thick with the smell of cheap whiskey, old sweat, and broken dreams. Men, with dull eyes and calloused hands, leaned against the rough-hewn bar, their laughter as dry as the cracked earth in a drought. Into that chaos, she was dragged. She was less a woman and more a force of nature, shoved into the saloon's grubby heart. Her hair was a tangled mess of midnight, her eyes not pleading but defiant. Her chin was lifted, a small act of rebellion in a circle of predators. They called her Tessa. Perhaps she was just past 20, but her eyes held the bitter wisdom of a soul that had lived 1,000 years. Jedediah, a man whose guts spilled over his belt buckle like a poorly kept secret, climbed onto a wooden crate, making it groan in protest. He pointed a trembling finger at her, his face flushed with liquor and pride. This wild horse, he bellowed, his voice cracking with excitement. She doesn't know how to bow, nor how to cook. Her tongue is sharper than a dagger, dared to shame me in front of my own men. A vile laugh erupted. A burly blacksmith downed his ale and roared, an untamed Mare like that, what madman would dare break her? Tessa's chest rose and fell, but she did not flinch. She stared directly at Jedediah, and her voice rang out, clear and steady as a church bell in a storm. The only one who can't teach anyone anything is you, Jedediah, not even yourself. The words struck the air like a whip. Silence fell. Jedediah, his face purple with rage, leaped from the crate. Before anyone could stop him, his hand swung, making a dry, cracking sound as it connected with her cheek. Tessa fell to the floor, dust swirling around her like taunting spirits. Blood trickled from the corner of her lip, a dark crimson stain on her pale skin, but she did not cry. She pushed one hand into the splintered floorboards, slowly rising, and wiped the dirt and blood away with the back of her sleeve. The room fell silent again, but this time it was not the silence of mockery, but of anticipation. In the shadowed corner, where darkness was the only companion, a man stood. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and though his right leg was braced with a crude wooden splint, he stood as firm as a rock. An ebony cane rested quietly beside him. As he stepped from the shadows, the entire room seemed to shift. Men sat up straighter, their glasses halting midway. He moved without a sound until he stood before Jedediah. His eyes were deep, and his jaw was set with determination. How much? His voice was low and even, cutting through the silence. All eyes turned to him. Jedediah stepped back, sneering. You, a crippled rancher? You think this wild filly will cook for you before she drives you mad? B.O. Dillon did not blink. He reached into the worn leather pouch at his belt. A crisp snap was heard as the pouch opened, and then silver coins rolled across the table, past pools of liquor and grimy hands. They stopped right in front of Jedediah, glinting with defiance. I'm not looking for someone easy to own, B.O. said, his voice still even but carrying an unshakable weight. I'm looking for someone with fire. Time seemed to stop. A man's laugh died in his throat. For once, the animosity in the room held its tongue. B.O. knelt, using a small knife to cut the coarse rope that bound Tessa's wrists. He helped her to her feet, his hand steadying her at the elbow. They stood facing each other in the center of the saloon. She did not smile, nor did she look grateful, but in her eyes, an ember seemed to glow anew from the ashes. He did not ask her name. She did not offer it. He simply led her through the crowd, past the tables where the whispers had not yet died. They stepped outside, into the cool night air. Tessa lifted her chin higher, letting the night wind catch the stray strands of her hair. She walked without a single glance back at the saloon doors, which only moments before had held her humiliation. Behind her, and then beside her, B.O. followed. He did not speak a word, only carried a lantern, its light a steady path in the darkness. But his eyes were on her, the woman who would not break. And though no words were said, something inside Tessa shifted. A realization that perhaps this man, like her, lived by his own rules. And so, she walked into the night beside a stranger who had seen her storm and offered her something that neither training nor ownership could provide: a choice. The wagon wheels sang a monotonous, mournful song as they rolled over the last of the trails. Dusk fell, draping a silent indigo blanket over the plains. For Tessa, this silence was heavier than any curse. It was an empty space where the ghosts of the past could dance freely. She sat upright, her arms crossed like a layer of armor, her jaw clenched. Bo's ranch appeared on the edge of a low ridge. It was not large or grand. It was a testament to stubbornness, a scar of determination. On the face of the plains, a simple wooden house, a listing barn braced with newer planks, and corral fences that stood defiantly against the wind. This place, like its owner, had fought to exist. B.O. stopped the wagon, climbed down slowly with the help of his cane, and then turned, offering her a hand. It was a simple gesture of courtesy, but to Tessa, it felt like a chain. She ignored his hand, jumping down to the ground herself. It was a small rebellion, a declaration that she was no one's cargo to be unloaded. She followed him silently into the house. Inside, it did not smell of poverty or despair. It smelled of cedar smoke and old leather, the scent of honest labor and deliberate solitude. B.O. pointed to the wooden ladder leading to a low loft above the main room. "Bed is made. Clean towel. By the basin," he said, his voice clipped, with no room for excess. Then, without waiting for a word of thanks, he turned and walked out, leaving her alone with the sound of the wind and her own breathing. That night, Tessa did not cry. Tears were a luxury she had long since abandoned. She lay on the stiff mattress, her eyes wide open, staring at the rafters above. She listened. The sound of the horses shifting in the barn, the crackle of the dying embers in the hearth, the ghostly whistle of the wind outside. Silence for Tessa had always been the breath a predator takes before it strikes, but this silence was different. It held no threat, only emptiness. And that, in a way, was even more frightening. Before the dawn could paint the horizon pink, she was awake. She drew water from the well, stoked the stove, and began to sweep the porch. No one told her to. Her hands knew no other language than work. Idleness was a dangerous enemy. When B.O. opened the door, limping toward the barn, she had already brewed a pot of coffee and was scrubbing an old saddle near the fence. He stopped, his whole body pausing for a moment. He looked at her, not with the gaze of a master at a servant, but of a man trying to solve a difficult equation. He said nothing, only stepped over and placed something on the porch rail. It was a pair of soft leather gloves, worn but well kept, sized perfectly for her hands. "Don't work like you're hiding a crime," he said, his voice not unkind. "Work like you belong here." Tessa took the gloves. She said nothing, but something in her eyes changed. A small crack had just appeared in the fortress walls she had so carefully built. That afternoon, as she was chopping wood by the shed, she caught him watching her. He wasn't judging, just observing. Her swing was powerful and efficient. She had done harder, filthier work than this. Chopping wood, in a way, was almost a kindness. She brought him a cup of coffee as he sat by the fire. He looked up, a little surprised. When he gave her a questioning look, she just shrugged. "You paid for me." His jaw tightened. "I paid to get you away from McCord, not to own you." "To most folks, they're the same thing," she replied dryly. "Not to me." Silence filled the room again, but it was no longer the cold silence from before. That night, lying in the loft, Tessa listened again. Not for danger, but just for him. The sound of Bio shifting below, the groan of the dying fire, the whisper of the wind outside. It wasn't trust, not yet. Trust was a currency she no longer possessed. But the ice of fear that had encased her heart for years, tonight, seemed to show the first faint cracks. And for a girl who had spent her life fighting, for every breath, that was a beginning. Time on the ranch was not measured by a clock, but by the turning of seasons and the wearing of leather on gloves. The land began to know her. The dust on her boots was the same dust that clung to the fences she patrolled each morning. Tessa rode the property line, her posture straight in the saddle as if she were born from the spine of the horse itself. She had become a part of this place, imprinting her own quiet story onto its vast pages. Bio watched her from the porch, his cane resting across his lap. He said little, but his eyes recorded everything. The way she spoke to the cattle, her voice, low and steady. The way she expertly wielded a hammer to fix a loose fence post. He saw not a girl who had been bought, but a steward slowly claiming her kingdom. One late afternoon, as the sun began to sink behind the hills, leaving streaks of orange and purple across the sky, that sound rang out. A dry thud of flesh and bone against hard earth, followed not by a cry of pain, but by the blunt, frustrated curse of a man betrayed by his own body. Tessa whipped around. Bio was sprawled awkwardly near the water trough, his cane several feet away. There was no hesitation in her movements. She was a creature of crisis. She rushed to his side, kneeling. "Don't move," he grunted, his teeth clenched. "You're not going anywhere," she countered, her voice firm. She slipped one arm behind his back, the other around his waist. "Come on," she muttered, using all her strength to lift him. "You're heavier than you look." "I look heavy," he rasped. But he let her guide him. The journey to the house was slow and agonizing. Her chest was pressed against his back, and in those pained steps, they were no longer a man and a woman, but a single, struggling entity, a shared rhythm of pain and support. They were both acutely aware of this closeness, an intimacy born of necessity, not desire. When they reached the steps, she helped him sit a bit too quickly. His leg hit the edge of the bench with a dull thump. He winced. "Sorry," she said, her eyes flicking up and then quickly away. "Not broken," he replied, his voice tight. "Just a bruised pride." She turned and walked into the house, not waiting for more. Behind her, Bio watched her go, the way the evening light caught in her hair. He let out a small, surprised chuckle. A thought, unbidden and as foreign as a wildflower in a desert, bloomed in his mind. Cute. The next morning, she found a scrap of paper next to her plate. "Tessa, feed bins are low. Check the north fence." Her name, written in his strong, uneven hand. Tessa, not girl, not you. It was a simple word, but on that scrap of paper, it felt like an anchor. That night, after the chores were done, the lantern cast a warm golden glow. She sat across from Bio by the fire, the flames their only silent confessor. He poured her a cup of coffee. They sat in silence for a long while, and then she spoke, her voice as flat as a windless lake, a calm, earned through blood and tears. "My parents were killed when I was 8. I saw it all." Bio looked at her, saying nothing. He just listened. "They were settlers," she continued. "Too proud, too trusting. One night, men came, said they wanted water. My father let them in. Her voice didn't tremble. It was tempered steel. I watched from beneath the floorboards. They burned the house, took what they wanted. I was found days later by a stable hand from another ranch. They thought I was a boy at first. It didn't matter. They put me to work. Hard work. Bloody work. The kind of work that makes you forget your own name. The fire crackled. She looked up, her eyes dry and fierce. I stopped crying that year. I decided that if no one was going to protect me, I would have to become the kind of girl no one could break. Beau's eyes met hers, deep, still, but not cold. He did not offer her the empty currency of pity. He did not speak meaningless words of comfort. He simply nodded that, and for Tessa, that nod was more than 1,000 words. It was an acknowledgement, a testament to the strength that had kept her alive. The last traces of winter clung to the northern hills, but the ground near the porch had begun to soften, breathing out the scent of thawed earth and wood smoke. Tessa knelt there, her sleeves rolled up, her fingers digging into the cold soil. The ground was hard and unforgiving, much like the world she had always known. But she persisted. She wasn't just planting seeds. She was burying ghosts and cultivating hope. Bo came around the corner of the barn, a bale of hay over one shoulder. He stopped mid-step when he saw her. "You planting potatoes down there?" he asked, a light surprise in his voice. Tessa looked up, a strand of hair falling from its tie, a smudge of dirt across her cheek. "Nope," she said. "Just a few flowers. Forget-me-nots, lavender, daisies ... if they take." Bo raised an eyebrow. "I figured you only grew things that could fill a belly." A small, but genuine, smile touched Tessa's lips. "Flowers can grow on stone, if they have enough water. I don't need much, just a patch of dirt that isn't trying to spit me out." There was something in her voice, not bitterness, not exactly hope. It was a quiet persistence, like the flowers themselves. She brushed the dirt from her palms. "My mother. She loved planting. She said every flower is a letter from the earth. After she died and I was taken, I never had ground of my own again. Never stayed long enough to see anything grow." She stood, pressing her hands to her knees. "Until now, I guess." Bo said nothing. He just gave a slow nod and turned back toward the house. That evening, when Tessa came in from the garden, she found a small bundle wrapped in linen placed in the center of the table. She carefully opened it. Inside was an old paper envelope, yellowed with time. The writing had blurred, but the word "seeds" was still legible. She looked up as Bo walked in. "Are these yours?" "They were my mother's," he said simply. "She saved seeds every spring. Said one day she would plant them when the house was finally right." Tessa's fingers curled around the fragile packet. "Why give them to me?" Bo looked at her, his gaze that still, unreadable one she had come to know. "Because perhaps the house is finally right," he said. "Or perhaps it just needed someone who knew what flowers were worth." That night, they spoke no more of it, but a soft warmth had settled between them. A wordless promise in a place where nothing had grown before. Something had now begun to bloom. The morning wind carried the smell of sage and the sharp tang of dust. Bo was chopping wood near the barn when he spotted the figure riding up the path. A man in a gray suit, too fine for these hills, his black boots polished. He dismounted with the air of an owner and walked straight toward the porch. "You Bo Dillon?" the man called. Bo nodded, his grip tightening on the axe. "Who's asking?" The man flashed a smile that never reached his eyes. "Thomas Whitfield. I'm with the First Land and Title Bank out of Cheyenne. Just here to verify some land holdings, a routine check." Tessa stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a cloth. She watched in silence. Whitfield pulled out a document. "Our records show some inconsistencies in your deed. Might just be clerical, but I'll need to see the original. B.O. knew this. Land was his, inherited from his father, but he was never a man of paperwork or fine print. I'll go get it, he said slowly. May I see what he brought first? Tessa's voice cut through the air, not loud, but as sharp as a shard of glass. Whitfield blinked. This is bank business, miss. I can read, she replied. And I've seen more than a few of these forms. She stepped down from the porch, took the offered paper, and unfolded it. Her brow furrowed as her eyes scanned the words. Her eyes weren't just reading, they were hunting for traps. Then she looked up. You're not from First Land and Title, she said, her voice dangerously calm. They haven't used this letterhead in 3 years. And this clause, she pointed to a line of tiny print, is a forfeiture trigger. If B.O. signs anything on this document, he loses his land within 60 days to repay a loan he never took. Whitfield's face stiffened. Now look here, miss. No, she interrupted, folding the paper decisively. You look. I've seen your type. Floating from one struggling ranch to the next, finding folks who can't read and tricking them into giving up everything. Not today. She handed the paper back to him. You can ride on, and I suggest you do it fast. Whitfield glared between them, then gathered his satchel with a scoff. He turned and rode off, kicking up dust behind him. B.O. watched him go, then turned to Tessa. How did you know all that? I used to work at a ranch that lost everything because of men like him, she said softly. I was just a girl, but I never forgot the words they used. B.O. nodded slowly. Your sharpness is worth more than an army. He looked at her for a long moment, something deep flickering behind his eyes. They used to say you were too wild to teach, too mouthy to learn. He paused, his voice low. Then they were fools. The wind, a lone wolf, howled outside the sturdy walls of the cabin. But inside, the silence was a warm, shared blanket, woven from the flickering firelight and the presence of two people. They sat opposite each other at the worn wooden table, where the ranch ledger lay open. It was the heart of the ranch, its lifeblood captured in columns of ink. Tessa was bent over it, her loosely braided hair falling over one shoulder. Her finger moved steadily down the page, bringing order to chaos, turning bales of hay and spools of wire into a story that made sense. B.O. sat across from her, his long fingers tracing the symbols in an old guide to cattle brands. His voice, low and steady, broke the quiet. This one here, he said, pointing to a mark, belonged to a ranch south of Casper. Gone now. Tessa leaned in to examine it. Looks like a hammer and a nail. Every brand's a story, he grumbled. Some good, some full of ghosts. She looked up. And what does yours say? He held her gaze a moment too long, then looked back down. At the book. Mine says Dylan built it. With my father's hands, and was almost burned by mine, then rebuilt slowly. She didn't press further. Instead, she turned a page in the ledger. We're 6 sacks short of grain for next month. You'll need to reorder. He looked at her, a faint amusement in his eyes. You sound like a banker. Maybe in another life. She murmured. One where I had shoes that matched and someone read me bedtime stories. Beau's expression shifted, softened. You're sharp with numbers. Not something most folks ever appreciated, she said dryly. I once told a rancher his cattle count was wrong. He called me a mouthy little thing and threw me out without pay. Then he was a fool. She blinked, surprised by his bluntness. B.O. leaned forward, his elbows on the table. I've had more help from you in 2 months than from 3 hired hands. Last year, you fix fences, break horses, and keep this place from falling apart. And you do it without ever asking what's in it for you. She looked down, her fingers stilling on the ledger. I never ask because I never expect anything to last. I always thought if I learned enough, worked hard enough, someone might finally let me stay, but they never did. They always said I was too loud, too wild, too much. Beau's eyes locked on hers, serious and steady. You're not too much. You are an ocean, and they were just men carrying small buckets. A silence heavy with meaning stretched between them. Then he spoke again, his voice quieter. Maybe people like you aren't meant to be kept. Maybe they're meant to be chosen. She slowly looked up, her expression unreadable. By someone who sees all of you, not just the pieces they want. Her voice caught a little when she asked, "Is that what you see?" He held her gaze. "I see someone who was born for more than what the world gave her." A blush rose to her cheeks, and she looked away, unsure what to say. After a beat, he added with a small, tentative smile, "Do you mind if I call you Tess?" She turned back to him. "Tess. It's shorter," he said, shrugging slightly. "Softer, maybe. And I figured you deserved something gentle for once." She laughed softly, a surprised, quiet sound. "No one's ever shortened my name before. They usually just shout it." "Well," he said, still smiling, "I'm not shouting." She paused, searching his face, then nodded. "All right, Tess." He tapped the ledger lightly. "You missed a number on that last row." She rolled her eyes and leaned back over the book, the faint blush still on her cheeks. "I did not." "You did," he said, still grinning. They sat like that for a while longer, the fire crackling, the prairie wind moaning in the distance. Two people who had never been taught how to belong, slowly finding their own way. And as she corrected the line in the ledger, Bio sat quietly watching her, thinking that sometimes the strongest people were the ones who had learned to walk through fire and still found the strength to grow wildflowers from the ashes. The morning sky wore a coat of ash gray, the color of unspoken words and impending farewells. Dew clung to the grass like tears the world had shed for her. Tessa walked, a satchel slung over her shoulder, her boots damp from the morning mist. Behind her, the ranch lay still, only a faint wisp of smoke curling from the chimney. On the kitchen table, she had left a piece of paper, folded neatly beside Beau's coffee cup. 5 words, written in her small, neat script. "Thank you for letting me survive. No tear stains, no goodbyes." It was the message of someone who never expected more than a warm place and a moment to catch her breath. Tessa did not cry as she walked. Her eyes were dry, her breath even, but each step was heavier than the last. Because, though she told herself it was time to go, that she had repaid his kindness and had no right to more, her heart betrayed her. Each step was an act of self-betrayal, tearing out the roots her heart had secretly planted deep in this soil she'd thought was too harsh to call home. She stopped at a shallow creek at the base of the ridge, the water glinting like broken glass. Over the stones, she sat down, unslung her satchel, and stared into the current. Not a sound but birdsong and the beat of her own heart. And then, hooves. She heard them before she saw him. Bio appeared on the ridge above, his silhouette against the pale sky, an unmistakable presence. He dismounted slowly, wincing slightly as his boot hit the ground. He just stood there for a long moment, then walked down to her. Tessa remained seated, her arms folded across her chest, not turning. When he was close enough to see the crease between her brows, he spoke softly. "The coffee was cold this morning." She didn't answer. He looked around, at the satchel, at the empty space beside her, at the raw silence hanging in the air. Then he asked, "You think your value is only in mucking stalls, Tess?" That name, her gentle name, made her look up. "I don't think anyone hires someone like me for anything else. I was trouble when I came, a burden when I stayed. I just thought, maybe it was time I stopped pretending." Pretending what? That this was ever meant to last. Her voice broke a little, and she bit her lip. Bio stepped closer. From his coat pocket, he pulled a faded piece of cloth, worn but still neatly folded. He held it out. Tessa blinked. "What is that?" "You left it behind, the first day," he said. Found it under the stairs. I could have tossed it, but I kept it. Why? Her voice trembled. Because I knew there would be a day, he said, his voice low and steady, when the past would come knocking to claim you. And I would need something to remind you that this is home. She stared at the cloth. It was her mother's handkerchief, stitched with tiny blue flowers. Something she had carried through every place, every beating, every hard morning. Something she thought she had lost forever. Her lips trembled. You kept it all this time, he nodded. Because from the moment you walked into that broken down barn and stood your ground, I knew you weren't just passing through. You aren't a lodger in a house, Tess. You are the person one builds an entire house around, if they're lucky enough to deserve it. She shook her head, her breath catching. I'm not someone men keep. No, he said gently. You're someone men follow if they've got the spine to. Tessa slowly stood up. The creek whispered beside them. Bio extended his hand. He didn't promise. He didn't beg. He just offered a choice, calm and steady, like he did with wild colts, with broken tools, with every hard thing that ever needed patience. Tessa looked down at his calloused fingers, then up into his face. And then, slowly, wordlessly, she placed her hand in his. Her fingers were rough, so were his. But when they laced together, they fit perfectly. He squeezed once, not to hold, not to trap, just to say he was here. She did not cry. But in that moment, by the creek and the rocks and the sky turning gold above them, she knew she was no longer just surviving. She was beginning to live. Summer rolled in over the hills, carrying the golden dust of the sun and the hum of bees. The ranch was no longer a place of silence and survival. It had become a symphony of life. The cattle grazed lazily, the fences stood tall and proud, and the small garden behind the house was now a riot of color. Lavender, forget-me-nots, and daisies swayed in the wind. The colorful vows of the earth. Tess rode the fence line each morning, her braids swinging behind her. She rode as if she were a part of the wind, her voice clear and strong as she commanded the herd. The men in town no longer looked at her with curiosity or pity. They called her Miss Tess who rides like thunder, an invisible crown bestowed upon the woman none of them could keep up with. She and Bio ran the ranch. There was no official announcement. None was needed. The way she walked beside him at the general store, the way he passed her a tool without asking, the way she handed him his coffee each dawn with the quiet smile of someone at peace with the world. It was all as clear as glass. One warm evening, with the sun hanging like a golden coin in the west, Bio saddled his horse and whistled for her. She met him outside the barn, her eyes curious. Planning on running off? Only if you're coming with me, he replied. Where are we headed? You'll see. They rode side by side, their horses' hooves kicking up soft clouds of dirt. The trail wound toward the southern ridge, to the hill where the wildflowers she had planted that first spring now grew thickest. Back then, it was a barren, rocky place, but she had said it deserved something beautiful. Now in the golden light of dusk, that hill was ablaze, a gentle fire of petals. They dismounted. Together, they walked up the final slope. At the top, they stood in silence, the flowers brushing against their knees, the wind moving through them like a hymn. Bio cleared his throat. You once said that flowers can grow on stone. Tess turned to look at him. Yes, I did. He looked at her, his gaze steady and soft. It got me thinking. If flowers can grow on stone, maybe love can too. She didn't speak, just watched him, every wall inside her trembling but not falling. Where does it grow, Tess? Bio asked. Love, I mean. She blinked, then a soft smile graced her lips, a smile full of everything she had been and everything she had become. In people, she said, who aren't afraid of where they came from, even when it hurt. His eyes dropped for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket. He didn't pull out a ring. He pulled out a strip of leather, worn by age and curved by Time. It was the first horse rein he had ever made as a boy. Burned into the center was a single letter, T. "I don't have a ring," he said. "Never figured I'd need one." He stepped closer and held it out. "But this has followed me longer than any man or woman. Through war, through storms. It's the only thing I ever trusted to hold steady." Tessa stared at the strip of leather, her throat tightening. "I want it to follow you now, Tess," Bio said. "If you'll let it." She didn't answer right away. She just reached out, her sun-browned, calloused fingers brushing his. She took the leather, looping it gently around her wrist. It was not a chain, but a circle of trust. Then she met his eyes. "You didn't try to tame me," she whispered. "No," he said. "You're not a thing to be tamed. You just stood beside me." "That's the only way I want it," he affirmed. "Beside you, always." They stood like that, long after the sun dipped behind the ridge. No vows, no preacher. Just flowers, wind, and two souls who had stopped running. From that day forward, folks didn't call it the Dillon Ranch anymore. They called it Wildflower Ridge. Not just for the blooms, but for the woman who made them grow. Tess rode beside Bio every day, through storm, through sun, through every broken fence and every birth in the barn. And when strangers came and asked who ran the place, the townsfolk would smile and say, "She does. The girl no man could keep?" "No," they'd reply, "the one a man chose. And the one who chose him back." Asterisk, if that story touched your heart, if you felt the dust in the wind, the fire in her eyes, and the quiet strength of a man who chose not to tame, but to stand beside, then you're in the right place. At Western Whispers, we bring you tales of love that rise from the hardest ground. Stories where hearts heal, where strong women and silent men find something worth holding on to. So if you believe in that kind of love, the kind you fight for, the kind you ride beside, hit that subscribe button, like, and share the story. Subscribe now to never miss a heartbeat from Western Whispers.